last left off, we left off with the last Bud Abbott and Lou Costello film, and pretty much the last outing with them as partners. Their partnership would dissolve shortly thereafter, and the two would go their own ways to pursue separate projects. For Lou, this meant a couple of different things. He would make the rounds and still do some of the classic Abbott and Costello routines, albeit with other partners, and ones that didn't necessarily need Bud, which is a contradiction in terms, because all the routines need both of them. But, he'd do things like the drill sergeant routine or the lemon table, the things where he just needed somebody. The more intricate routines he would kind of leave be. And he did a lot of that on the Steve Allen show. I've seen the clips of those, and, it's Lou Costello, so it's funny, but you can't deny that there's a piece missing, a vital piece missing. In 1958, however, Lou would finally, if briefly, achieve his dream of actually trying out a dramatic role when he landed the title character in the Tobias Jones story, a season 2 episode of the very popular Western Wagon Train, which is, if you're the uninitiated, if you're not familiar with classic Westerns, Wagon Train is a show about a wagon train, literally about a group of guys who lead settlers from Missouri to California and then back again, and along the way they have all these misadventures and whatnot. In the Tobias Jones story, Lou plays Tobias Jones, a well-meaning, good-hearted guy, but who is a drunk. And he has kind of adopted this little orphan girl, and during one of the stops on the wagon train, a man is murdered, and all the signs point to Lou, and he's sentenced to hang, and of course the stars of the show have to prove his innocence, and at the end of it, he's heading off to California with the little girl so that they can live, and he's going to clean up his act. I had thought of doing an entire episode to review that show, but I don't think there's as much to talk about, just to say that it's really interesting to knowing Lou Costello primarily as a comedian, to see him playing a dramatic role. Because you are constantly waiting for him, especially in the cowboy get-up, and you think back to the Wistful Widow of Wagon Gap or Ride 'em Cowboy, you're constantly waiting for him to do the double take or something like that, which he does at the very end, kind of as a little joke to make the little girl laugh. But throughout the show, he is playing it dead straight, and it's a bizarre thing to see baby-faced Lou Costello play this drunk. And I don't say bizarre as a bad thing. It's a really good performance. I don't know if he was ever going to achieve iconic dramatic actor status, but I think he had some acting chops. We've talked about that a lot on here, is that to do what he and Bud did, especially under the circumstances that they did them, requires you to be a great actor. And it was neat to kind of see this example of that skill. As my mom always says, if you know how to make somebody laugh, you know how to make them cry. And I think, had things gone differently, I think Lou might have had a nice career doing things like this, little guest spots on television shows, dramatic roles. I don't know if he'd ever have his name above the title again, but I think he could have been a decent hand at it, really. And the Wagon Train episode garnered him a lot of critical acclaim. A lot of people praised this performance, and rightfully so. It's a really good performance. And a nice turn for him. So I'm glad he got that at least once in his life, because wanting to do dramatic roles was a big goal of his. So that was in 1958. In 1959, we have the major topic of today's discussion, and that is the one and only film Lou did without Bud. Sorry, I ran my fingers through my hair. And that is The 30-Foot Bride of Candy Rock, a film kind of set up to be a drive-in parody of a lot of the giant person films that were very popular at the time. The Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, The Amazing Colossal Man, Attack of the Colossal Beast, that kind of thing. Uh, and I'm pretty sure from what I've read that Lou was excited to have a project that was solely his. Even when you look at a lot of the Abbott and Costello movies, his character is usually the main focus. Gets a lot of solo scenes and whatnot. But I think he was excited to show what he could do without Bud, so he could prove that he had the ability to carry on and have a career outside of Abbott and Costello. So here's the question: did he accomplish that? And that's a difficult question to answer, because watching this film again, you cannot escape the gut reaction you see from the first time you watch it, and that is that this film just simply is not very good. Kills me to say that, but it is a fact of life that this is just not a good movie. Of all the Abbott and Costello films I've watched, and there are some of them, as I've discussed quite frankly on this channel, you know, some of them are classics and others are just not that great. I can't say that any of them are hard to get through. Coming Around the Mountain, maybe. But for the most part, you can still get through them. This was a difficult movie to get through. It's an hour and a half, and it took me like 3 days to get all the way through it. I had to take breaks. Because there's just a lot of things in this that just do not work. And they all come together to make a film that I can't even say that it's fun in a bad in a fun way. It's just bad. All right, and there's a lot of elements that go into that. So let's kind of dissect this and see if we can find out what the major issue with this film is, because there's a couple of them. So first let's talk about what the movie is about. So the title kind of gives it away, but in this movie, Lou plays a garbage man who has dreams of being a renowned scientist. He's kind of the joke of the town, this little town of Candy Rock, and he's in love with the niece of the local big shot who runs everything and is looking to run for governor and all that. And through bizarre happenstance, now the way you would think this movie would play out, especially being kind of a comedy look at the giant person films of the era, is that somehow his invention would cause his girlfriend to grow to enormous size. That is in fact not what happens. She grows to enormous size by walking into a cave in Dinosaur Valley, gets hit by some weird smoke, and then grows for no real discernible reason, and then, you know, basically just shrinks back down at the end when the plot says so. So that's the plot. So let's get the elephant in the room out of the way right here at the start. I said that this is not a good film, and I will stand by that. But I feel I need to be very clear when I say that this is not a bad film due to the absence of Bud Abbott. Okay? It's easy to kind of criticize this as, well, Lou can't do anything without Bud. And I won't lie, the movie is definitely hurting without that Bud Abbott presence. Lou needs a specific presence to counteract him, even when he's playing a character remarkably different from any character he's ever played. And they do their best to supply him with that. They don't skimp on his co-star. Noted character actor and brilliant comedian Gale Gordon plays the big shot of the town and Lou's main comic foil. And Gale Gordon is a steady, skilled hand at this. The man has a long, distinguished career, probably best known as Mr. Mooney on The Lucy Show. He was one of Lucille Ball's favorite straight men, because he played opposite her in that, and he was on the radio show My Favorite Husband, which would become the basis for I Love Lucy. And he has a long career. He played a similar character in the radio show, and I believe the TV show Our Miss Brooks, where he plays the huffy principal of the school. So the guy has been around. This is not a slouch. This is the straight man of Lucille freaking Ball. But the simple fact of the matter is that just because you work well with one person doesn't mean you work well with another. And I think Gail Gordon and Lou try. They try to have that Bud and Lou back and forth, the authority figure versus the little pipsqueak, and it just does not work. Would this have worked had Bud played that role? Maybe it would have worked a little better, but I don't think it would have saved the movie. I think the major problem, of course, with any, you can find the major problem in just about any film, going back to the basics, the script. The script is all over the place. It is, as I've said, it wants to be a parody of these giant person movies, but it doesn't. Lou being the professor has no bearing on the storyline. He doesn't make her grow accidentally, and he doesn't actually shrink her down at the end. At least, I don't believe so. It's very unclear. And the movie just kind of runs around doing different things. It's the best way I can describe it. I mean, the military spies the 30-foot bride and freaks out, and then they're like, oh, she's a Martian, and they try to attack her, but they're always in different scenes, and it just doesn't ever connect. There's this long sequence towards the climax. Boy, how, I've said during the course of this show that my least favorite part of just about every Abbott and Costello movie is the end chase scenes. I feel like they're overdone. They take a little too long, and they just didn't work. They were always my least favorite part. Well, I was nostalgic for that during the chase scene at the end of this one, where the army is chasing Lou around, and Lou's carrying his little robot Max, who somehow makes them travel in time, but only to the point where it changes their costumes. Like, it makes Lou into a Union soldier, and the army into Confederate soldiers, and then into cavemen, and it's like, what? And then it makes Lou fly, and it's just like, I have never in my life, watching an Abbott and Costello movie, glared at the screen and gone, what is happening? And that is exactly what I did during this film. I was like, what is going on here? It's insanity, and not like the good kind of insanity that you come to associate with a Bud and Lou picture. It was just like, shit was just happening all over the place for no reason. And yeah, so it was just really hard to get through. I think another issue here is Lou's other co-star. Dorothy Provine plays the titular 30-foot bride. And she would go on to have a pretty good career as a character actor, probably best known, to me at least, and I think to a lot of other people, as Haley Mills' older sister in the Disney classic That Darn Cat. So she had a pretty good career going forward. That does not take away from the fact that she is bad in this movie. She is just very, very bad. Just very... sometimes they want her to talk like she's a little baby, and she just keeps yelling his name, Albert! Albert! It's just like, oh my Lord in heaven, she was irritating as shit. It also does not help. And Hollywood has a long history of doing this, and it's even to this day. It does not help that at the time of this film's production, Dorothy Provine was 24 years old. Lou was 52. Now, he still had his baby face, and he still had, that cute little cherub look, but you could not ignore the fact that he was much older than her. And it just makes I won't say it makes it uncomfortable or creepy, but it just looks wrong. It just looks silly. He should be playing her dad. And I think that leads to the next issue with this film, and that is Lou works best when he has someone to work off of. He's been in a comedy team all his life. He's not a singular comedian, you know? And he needs that comic foil. And we've already talked about Gale Gordon doing his best, but just not working. But so many of his scenes in this movie, he's playing it by himself. Because just due to the special effects at the time, you know, they would film Dorothy Provine's stuff and then his stuff and then kind of played it together to make the scene. So when they're having a scene, most of the time he's talking to nothing. And the other time he's also playing the voice of the weird robot Max that he builds. So when he's having long conversations or scenes with the robot, it's all dialogue that's going to be added later because he has to record the voice. So he's doing these scenes against nothing. And it really impacts the performance. It really does. And yeah, I would feel worse about kind of shitting on this movie if I didn't know that Lou Costello himself was not a fan of it, and that he was excited about the prospect, but from all accounts, as the production of the film went on, he was less and less enthused each day, and just feeling like this was not his best work. Just, you know, he and Dorothy Provine would have multiple conversations on the set of going, how did we get into this, and how do we get out of it? So I don't feel so bad bashing this film, because I know he wasn't a fan of it either. So, you know, yeah. What's disappointing about this movie, aside from the movie itself, is that watching it, you can see that even though this movie is bad, that I think Lou still accomplished his goal and proved that he could carry a movie without Bud. He's playing a drastically different character than the Lou Costello character from the Abbott and Costello routines. He's an intelligent person. He's not clumsy or childlike. So his character and his performance have grown, and adding to the long list of Abbott and Costello projects I wish we had gotten, I firmly believe that had the world gone a little differently, had circumstances been different, that this film might have proven a nice audition film, and Lou might have had a career resurgence with Disney. Because this movie is very reminiscent of the live-action comedies that Disney was doing around the time. I could, even though the film was made prior to this one, I could totally see Lou Costello playing the absent-minded professor. Easily. And I think back to the other Disney films that were about to come down the pike, and I think there was definitely a spot for Lou and his knowledge of comedy, his more mature character performance, and just his name recognition could have brought a lot. So I truly believe, had things gone differently, Lou might have had a career resurgence and had a whole other career after Abbott and Costello. I really believe that. Sadly, that is not what happened, and we have to get to this part now. I don't think there's much more to talk about the movie. It's a bit of a dud. It's a wonderful artifact for Abbott and Costello purists and collectors and completists, but taken as a film on its own, its heart is there, but the execution leaves a lot to be desired. And unfortunately, kind of like Dance With Me, Henry, this story has an even sadder ending, because it's widely believed, especially by his daughters, that, you know, doing this film, and even though he was not as physically active, or this film wasn't as physically demanding as any of his previous work. But doing this movie took a lot out of Lou, and his health had never been good. And 9 weeks after finishing the completion of this film, Lou suffered a heart attack. And he was taken to the hospital. He seemed to be recovering, and then he had a second heart attack. On March 4th, 1959, Lou Costello passed away. And in one of the bizarre, you'll never believe this, if someone wrote this in a movie, you'd never believe it, kind of stories. As it goes, apparently when Bud Abbott received the call to let him know that Lou was gone, he was apparently watching a rerun of the old Abbott and Costello TV show where they were doing Who's On First. And Bud was quoted as saying, "I don't know why I was watching it that night. I never watch it. I lived it 1,000 times. Why do I need to watch it? But that night, that's what I was watching. And it was the night I lost my best friend." Bud would go on, and he would do a few minor things here and there. In 1960, he also attempted a career revival where he partnered with a new comedian named Candy Candido to form Abbott and Candido. And they started off doing old Abbott and Costello routines, including Who's On First, and they would eventually kind of transition into their own bits. I have never seen any footage of Abbott and Candido, so I can't judge how it went. I don't know if I'd want to see any footage, and I know that's unfair to both Bud and Mr. Candido, who, according to Bud, was a very talented comedian and never tried to replace Lou, was never trying to do Lou's shtick. He was his own comedian and did the scenes his own way. So it's possible that this was a really fresh take on classic material, but kind of the same way I feel about watching Lou do the old routines on the Steve Allen Show without Bud. I don't think I'd want to see him do them without Lou. So maybe that's not the impartial criticism I should be doing, but there it is. Bud would say that he had a great time working with Candy Candido, and that he wanted to kind of prove to himself that, he made one man funny, could he make another man funny? And from all accounts, they got some pretty rave reviews and did good business, touring clubs and things like that. So it seems like he was able to prove that to himself. So I'm glad he got that. He deserved that. He would lead a fairly quiet life, doing some various small projects here and there, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. But on April 24th, 1974, Bud Abbott would pass away from cancer. When he died, and I've mentioned this before on this channel, but it bears repeating at this stage, no less an authority than Groucho Marx praised Bud as the greatest straight man of all time. And you cannot deny that. And Bud himself would say that Lou was the most naturally gifted comedian the world had ever seen. And so there it is. That is the official end of the Bud Abbott and Lou Costello story. And yeah, I mean, you can't get much more of a down note ending than this. I started this series over a year ago, and it's been a real adventure, and I've loved it, and we're going to talk more about that at a later date. But from the very beginning, from the time I recorded that very first introduction video, I knew that I was going to have to decide how I wanted to handle the end. Because, yeah, the Abbott and Costello story ends on a fairly down note, no matter which way you look at it. Whether you look at, Dance With Me, Henry, or you look at The 30-Foot Bride of Candy Rock. It's a down ending either way. And I did not want to end this series and this retrospective on two of the people who have had the most impact on me in my life on a down note. So I had to ask myself, how do I want to end this series? How do I want to put a bow on this? I want to go out on a positive. I want to go out on a high. So what I've decided is that we're going to do something here on Drive Home Reviews we've never done for anybody else. We are going to take a look at the other output of Bud Abbott and Lou Costello, because there is so much. We have been focusing, because this is a film criticism channel, that's what I do, but their influence was so far-reaching. They touched every medium. They were Broadway performers. They did radio, TV, cartoons, and they have had a huge impact on the evolution of pop culture in ways that I think some people might not be aware of. So to wrap this series up, when next we meet, we're going to take a look at the other creative outputs of Abbott and Costello. We're going to take a look at the legacy, the world of Abbott and Costello. So, thank you for joining me. Please join me for the final episode of this sub-series. And as always, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.